Everybody. Welcome to the STEM Standards session. In this session, we're going to cover the new K-5 standards that have been rolled out by the Tennessee Department of Education to take action in 2020-2021 school year. We're going to kind of go in depth with these standards today. We're going to talk a little bit about what are the implications for these standards for you in your classroom. First of all, we need to understand that these standards have been put in place because of a request on Governor Lee's part to try to form a better workforce for our economy. Tennessee has a very diverse economy. We are heavy in STEM fields, and unfortunately, up to this point, we have been unable to fulfill the needs as far as workers go in these STEM fields. So the goal is by increasing access to STEM education and CTE education, we will have a better workforce going forward to help boost our economy. So we're going to talk a little bit about those STEM standards and what they mean for us in the classroom. But before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Jessica Everett. I am the STEM teacher at Hardin Valley Elementary School here in Knoxville, Tennessee. I've been an educator for a little over 13 years now. Love teaching STEM. It's been fantastic. So I can't wait to share some of my enthusiasm for these new standards with you today. Before we jump in, I need to clarify probably what STEM is, because the easy go-to answer is STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And yes, that is true, but a lot of times what you then turn around and get from other adults is, well, don't we already teach those things in isolation? Yes, we do. And so when we talk about STEM, we're not talking about those ideas in isolation. We're actually talking about them in a very different way. So STEM to me is when students apply math and science concepts to solve an engineering problem with technology. So your outcome from any STEM task is going to be technology. Now, it's not the technology that necessarily has to be plugged in or has a database. It's a technology, it can be as simple as a pencil or a pair of scissors. So we have to change the way we think about what STEM is in order to meet these new standards. So today's roadmap, where we're going with this, three main areas. We're going to start with inspiration. These standards are for K through 5 students, and they are supposed to be standards for all. So that's their idea behind incorporating these standards in every K-5 classroom. We want all students to have accessibility to this, to increase all ethnicities, all different socioeconomic statuses, all different areas, whether you're rural, suburban, it doesn't matter. We want to see them being able to compete in these STEM career fields. So we're going to talk a little bit about how these standards are there to inspire us to do better for our students. Then we're going to go into the impact. How do they actually apply to your classroom? And then the last one is my favorite part, where we talk about how are we going to incorporate this? Where do we even start? How do we jump into these new standards? Because I know as an educator myself, we get a lot of standards rolled out to us. It feels like every year. It's not, but it feels like that. And we're great at unpacking them. We're great at understanding them, but that incorporating step is the next level. And so we're going to talk about that, and there's several videos throughout this GIS course that you're going to see how to incorporate these into your classroom. All right, so for inspiration, this is my favorite quote of all times. People who are crazy enough to believe they can change the world are the ones who do. And I firmly believe this. This is something that if you are a STEM-minded person or even an educator, we do the craziest things for our students, and that's because we know that they're going to be what moves the world. And we want that world to be the best it can be, so we do the best we can for our students. And so these new STEM standards are calling us to be the best we can be for our students and to dream big for them so that they can in turn dream big for themselves going forward. If that's not enough inspiration for you, this is a map put out by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it shows the growth in STEM career fields in various states. And if you'll notice, Tennessee is one of a handful of very dark blue states. We are steeped in this STEM field with different careers. And it ranges from a lot of different things. We have a lot of auto manufacturers here in the state. We have an Amazon headquarters that does a lot of logistics. We have a lot of different STEM fields going on here in our state. We're very fortunate. But if we're not continuing to grow our students in that direction, are we going to be able to continue to stay one of those dark blue states like we would like to? So there are 4 main areas to these inspirational standards: problem resolution skills, critical thinking and context, cause and effect relationships between STEM disciplines, and STEM fields exploration. I don't want you to look at these 4 standards or areas of the standards as things that do not intertwine, because they are completely intertwined and interwoven when we teach. So it's not a checklist. I know we say that a lot in education, but this is sincerely not a checklist. You can't really do problem resolution without doing some critical thinking and thinking through the cause and effect. And when we throw in a career along with that, we're completing all of those 4 main areas. So we're going to talk a little bit about those in depth now. Problem resolution skills, and this is where I'm kind of summing them up. For the in-depth document, if you actually look to the left of this video, there's going to be a link posted for you to be able to look at the actual state standards as written by the state. But I wanted to kind of break it down into terms that are easier for me to understand, because as educators, we get enough complex language. Sometimes it's good to just have this is exactly what it means, instead of having to discern that for yourself. So the first thing is that when we introduce problems to students, they need to be real world. They need to investigate real problems that require multiple sources while using content-specific vocabulary. So just looking at one person's idea doesn't really give us multiple sources. It doesn't really think about how do we incorporate different ideas. We want these kids to start pulling different resources together to get the best possible solution. And while doing that, they need to really be able to use the vocabulary that's important to that field and to that area. The next area that this explores is procedures. Now, procedures, we're talking about utilizing collaboration skills and problem solving to achieve common goals. We use the engineering design process for this point. It is important to teach students that process. That's going to become common language for our students, hopefully going forward. A lot of our students already have it, but it depends on what you've been introduced to as educators. So we're all learning. Obviously, we're not engineers. We'd be getting paid a lot more, and we wouldn't love kids as much as we do. But that doesn't mean that we can't reach out to learn more about this engineering design process so that we can help our kids to one day maybe see themselves as engineers. The last part of these problem resolution skills are the technologies. We need our students to understand and use technology responsibly, ethically, and safely. We teach these skills to students. You're aware of how we teach them. You know, we don't post our names online. We don't post our pictures online. We talk to them about internet responsibility a lot and cybersecurity. So for our students to begin to understand these, some of those building blocks are already in place depending on what grade your students are in. But this just outlines that we really need to make sure that we're providing that. As students are pulling multiple sources, they need to know how to use these search engines responsibly and safely. All right, so here's an example of GIS, and we'll talk a little bit more about GIS in a minute specifically. But this is just an example of how we could use problem resolution with GIS. So if we look, we could talk to the students. This is a map of an estimated landslide area. So many of these areas are still active as far as possible and potential landslide areas. So if we look at this, we could talk to the students about, where are safe locations in this area to build? How can we plan to stop the erosion or slow these landslide potentials in our area if we were to build here? What would be some things that we could use to stabilize the earth so that we don't have to worry about these? And so you're bringing in GIS to help boost that problem because it's a real world problem. These are really how people investigate these issues. They don't just come up with it out of their head. So the next area of our standards are the cause and effect relationships between STEM disciplines. So we want to understand, and we want our students to understand, how these 4 areas really are intertwined and not really able to be pulled apart. I know we teach math and science in isolation a lot of times, but realistically, math is the language of science. So as our students learn and develop more foundational skills, that's going to become more apparent to them. But until that foundation is firmly built, we are going to still have to teach those 2 things in our classroom, more than likely in some form, just by themselves. But we also want to make sure that we're doing these 4 things with our cause and effect relationship. So we want to be doing cross-pollination. And that means that we're going to analyze connections within the STEM disciplines to answer questions and to investigate, develop solutions to real-world problems. So there we are again with the real-world problems. We want to keep this real for our students. And honestly, it's easier to keep it real a lot of times because there's more actual information out there for them to grab and research with. We want them to be able to analyze. And we know when we think about the level of thinking, analyze is up there. But we want them to really think about how are these fields working together to help me discern an answer to this problem. Next area is explore. We want our students to analyze and identify impact of emerging global STEM trends, real-world challenges with local, state, national, and international implications. So in other words, we want our kids to know that these problems are happening around us, and when we work to solve them, that can have an impact on a lot of different levels of our world, whether it be our local, our state, our national, or our international community. So they need to see kind of that ripple effect that happens when we find a problem, we isolate that problem, we come up with our solution through an engineering design process. That can change the world. The next area is procedures. We want our students to explore, develop, test, and refine models used by scientists and engineers to solve problems. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. This is one of the biggest struggle areas for me with my students because you all probably have the same thing. The students like to rush through. They think they have the answer right off the bat. They don't want to go through the process, the procedure that is an engineering design process, or even a science procedure. They struggle with that patience and that perseverance. But that is our job to teach them explicitly how do we do that, and so we can do that by modeling a lot of those behaviors and those procedures. The last area of this section of the standards is community. We want our students to identify community challenges and apply STEM content and practices to construct creative and innovative responses and solutions. So this goes right back to that explore area. We want them to identify it. We want them to find a solution. We want them to think about how these solutions are going to change their community. So let's look at a little bit of an example of that. This is our cause and effect kind of example using GIS. So we could even talk to our students specifically here in Tennessee about the Gatlinburg fires that happened. We can talk about, how do we maintain that by using GIS? This is how they plan for emergency response. This is how they survey the damage afterwards. Insurance companies are going to use this. But one of the big things that you could talk to the students about is, which direction did the smoke drift? I know that was a study that's been mentioned before. You could talk about how do we plan for better resource management given where these fires were located? What do we know about the surrounding areas as to why they didn't catch, but these areas did? So we can use this for students to begin to understand. We could talk about, if this was a grid, we could overlay a grid and they could talk about the different areas, the different coordinates of where these specific fires fell. They could talk about the area of the fires. Lots of different information can be pulled from this map specifically that's going to help you achieve a lot of the areas of these new standards. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the STEM fields exploration. And I just love getting students excited about careers starting in kindergarten because when they come in and you ask them what they want to be, they want to be what they've seen or what they've heard. A lot of them want to be what their parents are, or they want to work at a grocery store, or they want to be a doctor, or they want to be a nurse, or they want to be a firefighter or a mail carrier. They want to be the things that they've seen, that they understand. And when you start to help students see themselves in these different career fields, it becomes real for them and it becomes something that they can attain. And that's what we want for all of our students. So with these new standards, the STEM fields exploration is a big part of that. And there's three main areas to those. They're investigate, the opportunities, and then to explore. So let's talk a little bit about investigate. Investigate calls for us to have our students look into real-world problems, challenges, that exist in different STEM fields, synthesizing multiple sources of information. So again, real-world problems, we want them pulling that data, that information, and we want them to be using the idea of these cross ties, these cross-pollination between these STEM fields in their solutions, right? The next area is opportunities. We're going to be talking about with our students to analyze career opportunities and occupations that exist in a variety of STEM fields. We want them to see these different career fields. We want them to see what the name of the job actually is. What kind of degree do I need to do this? Because if they don't know these background ideas, these opportunities, they can't grab hold of them. The last one is to explore, and so that's when we want our students to delve into how technology is integrated into different career fields and occupations. And so when we talk about a STEM solution, we're immediately talking about those STEM careers and fields that tie to them. So we need to make those connections explicit for our students because they're not aware of all these fields yet. And the STEM standards actually call specifically for some different areas. They call for the biomedical sciences, they talk about the GIS, and they talk about computer science. And so we're going to be talking and focusing throughout this course on the GIS piece. And for us to understand that, we probably need to know what GIS is in case you haven't looked it up. So GIS is any time you tie data to a location, okay? So GIS actually stands for Geographic Information Systems, but I can tell you as an elementary school teacher, the first time I heard that, it went over my head and around a corner. But the main thing that stuck was that if I'm using data and I'm using a location, I'm using GIS. The map is actually kind of what just grounds your data. It holds it and anchors it so that it becomes a more understandable working piece for you when you're trying to make a solution. So that's what GIS is all about. We're making solutions more attainable and more understandable through this image using a map. All right, so let's talk about GIS as a field. There are three main areas they want us to explore of GIS within these new STEM standards. The first one is to capture. We want our students to understand how we capture information with GIS. How do we put that data to work? Then it's going to talk about storing and manipulating that data. What does the information look like and how do we form it into what we need? So how can I make the data tell the story I want to tell? If I want to tell the story of how my school got to be placed where it was, I need to be able to map that, show populations, show probably how the other school was overloaded ahead of time. So I'm going to have to put that data into a GIS platform that I can use to maybe show a change over time. So that's how I can begin to see this piece working for my students. The last area that we're looking at is analyzing, managing, and presenting. How can we use this information for change or sustainability? So not only are the students learning how to grab the data and information, they're learning how to make it into what they need it to be. Then they're learning how to use that information, that new GIS, that map that they've created, to actually cause change or to help maintain a certain thing. And so these are big concepts for kids to understand. These standards by no means are easy for us to begin to approach, but we're going to learn how to get a foothold into them. Okay, so let's talk about impact. So genius is in the idea. Impact, however, comes from action. It's a great quote. When we think about that, we have great ideas all the time. But until we put them into action, those ideas may as well have never existed. So we've got to talk to our students about these standards because otherwise they're genius. Yeah, they're great ideas, but they're never going to impact or make a change for us or our students. So here's the impact of these standards. We need to start talking about careers now. We need to stop waiting for high school to consider and introduce career choices to our students. I know we talk about community helpers in the younger grades. We don't approach those as, when you grow up, you could do this. These are the things you need to do to become this. We need to see our students learning more about careers in elementary grades, and not just one career, but diverse careers in STEM fields, because that's the way the world is shifting. It's becoming more and more STEM heavy. We also need to stop waiting to introduce data to our students. We're asking students to not only know what data is, but to be able to use it. So I can tell you from personal experience, when I mentioned the word data at the beginning of the year, especially my first year of STEM, those kids had no idea what I was talking about. Some of them actually thought I was trying to say the word date. What we need to understand is we've got to give them the building blocks to reach these. These standards are for K-5. They're not outlined as, here's your tiers for kindergarten, here's where you need to be by first grade, here's where you need to be by second. It is one block of standards. And so if your students are in kindergarten, there's going to be less that you're doing, but you're putting in those building blocks so that the students can be successful by fifth grade with these standards. The next area that we're going to talk about with these standards needing to impact are solving problems. We have to prepare our students to solve the problems of tomorrow that we can't even fathom today. Um, it's one thing to bring these real world problems into the classroom, but to ask them to become critical thinkers, to be problem solvers around these current issues is going to make them better people to face the challenges they're going to face tomorrow. And if we don't push them beyond where we are, we don't stand a lot of hope in the future. We have to make the next generation better, and some of that means making them tread water a little bit. So don't be scared to let them struggle. Let them solve problems. Make them solve problems. All right, so this is kind of another way to look at this. When we talk about our STEM standards, we've got to change a little bit of the way we teach. We need to shift from being so much the old school teacher to being more of a facilitator. So we know the traditional teacher reads out concepts, they provide notes, they expect the children to just listen. It's a very lecture heavy room, they manage the classroom well, and they don't acknowledge mistakes on their own part. Whereas a facilitator is going to be modeling some of the behaviors we want our students to come to through these new STEM standards. So they're going to engage in a discussion with children and some more of a give and a take versus that I'm going to give you everything you need to know. I'm an encyclopedia. I got all the answers. Here you go. That's not realistic. Nobody has all the answers. So don't present that to the students as if that's a real thing. We're going to design activities to forge collaboration. Our planning shifts from being what are we going to say to what are the kids going to do? Way more on what are the kids going to do? How am I going to get them to go that direction in their thinking? We need to encourage outside of the box thinking. And we need to forge collaboration and create future leaders. A great way to do this collaboration piece is for you to actually collaborate with a team. So if I'm by myself, I can come up with some pretty good ideas for lessons. But if I've got a teammate next door who has strengths in other areas, if we collaborate, we're going to have the best lessons possible for my students. And I think that's what we all want. So if it's possibility, I would say collaborate and then model that for your students. How do we have a dialogue that's a collaboration dialogue? You're going to also treat mistakes as part of the learning process. And that's a huge thing. Sometimes I purposefully make mistakes in my room because I need to model these STEM behaviors. I need to show them, you know what? What can I learn from the mistake I just made? What could I do to not make that same mistake in the future? And so we do this in our classrooms a lot anyways, but these STEM standards call for us to do it even more frequently than we have been. So where do we start? How do we begin incorporating these standards? Because it's a lot. And everybody's foothold where they start incorporating these standards is going to be different. It's going to depend on what grade you teach. It's going to depend on what subject you teach. Some of our teachers are going to be just science teachers or just math teachers. So depending on if you're departmentalized or not, this might look different for you and where you're going to start. And honestly, your strengths are going to play into what you choose to do to start and kick this off. So it's completely up to you, but here are some ideas of how we can start and some kind of regulations to keep you in check. First of all, start simple. Don't jump in head first and drown, okay? These aren't meant to overwhelm you. These standards are not meant to tell you you're doing everything wrong and this is how you do it right. These standards are there to inspire you and to help inspire your students. So drowning doesn't help anybody. So please try to pick something that is a small stepping stone towards where you want to be in the end. And maybe even making a plan. What are my goals this year with these standards? Give yourself the grace to move through these standards as you learn them. The next thing to start is model it for students. Students don't necessarily have to be hands-on with the GIS at first. We can teach through GIS. So instead of using a PowerPoint or one of your active board lessons, you could use instead GIS. Use a map as your teaching platform. The last thing is to integrate it. If I'm a social studies teacher, I can easily pull GIS in. If I'm a math teacher, I can pull GIS in. Incorporate them into what you're already doing, and it doesn't become another thing on your plate. It actually lifts part of that load for you. Okay, so our takeaways for this session. This is kind of you show me that you did it today. After you have watched the other presentations and videos, so I do need you to watch the other ones before you do the assignment for this session, I want you to think about your classroom, think about your students. I know that's hard after the way this year ended, but we've got to pull it together. I want you to think about your teaching style and your teaching strengths. We all have them. What are they? Now I want you to think about where are you going to start and why. Why is that a good starting point for you in your room on the road to achieving these standards for your students? How will starting at that point help you to experience success with your students in GIS? And how will this change your instruction? Everything that you add onto your plate, into your mind, changes your instruction, whether we mean for it to or not. And so how is this going to change your instruction? So if you'll answer these questions using the link for the assignment to the left, that would be fantastic. I'll try to put on there also an area for questions. If you have more questions about STEM, the new STEM standards, please make sure you pop into our live sessions so that I can answer questions for you live during the Zoom. And I'm happy to help anytime outside of that. My contact information is also located to the left of the screen if you would like to reach out at any time. All right, guys, I hope you enjoy the rest of your sessions. Thank you for giving me your time today.